How are you? Welcome to Critical Moves of Celesur. Multilateralism of Russia versus unilateralism of the U.S. The recent moves of the Kremlin in ways of cooperation, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, are counterpart to the unilateral strategy of the U.S., who keeps on looking at us as their backyard. What is the evidence for all of this? How do the nations answer to this? How does Washington see it? This is what we're going to be analyzing today. Let's begin. From member, from associate, Mr. Medvedev catalyzed Cuba when they were visiting the island. In this context, he visited the first horizontal oil rig that was built with money from Russia. On this way, they work for limiting their dependency. In the midst of the events, for the deficit of fuels that the island is having due to the blockade. And in the same way, the Vice Minister, Yusuf Borisov, also visited, on behalf of President Putin, visited Cuba and reinstated his intention. These relationships of brotherhood are a sign to the international community that the government of President Maduro is legitimate and that there is a respect to this government. Venezuela is a very important country for Russia and for Latin America, according to statistics. The commerce between Russia and Venezuela has increased in $2.4 million. We can say that there are new entrepreneurs with transfer of technology, participation of Russia in all scopes of strategic production of the country. We have renovated and advanced tremendously in the oil and gas industries. In agriculture, there will be new projects that are very, very advanced, with the presence of Russia, of Russian technology, advisement, in production of food. We have seen that military technological advisory that advances in a perfect way. We have renewed all of the contracts of support, advisement, and advance in the technical military aspect. Russia will resist, as well as Cuba, the pressure from abroad. So we have to make our ties stronger. For our country, for Latin America, and for Caribbean, it's important to have our foreign cooperation. They're not our backyard. We think that Latin America should be stable and effective. The conversations of today, we have also seen the advancements of the Russian Federation in the economic, social development of Cuba until 2030 in spheres such as energy, transportation, industry, biotechnology, agriculture, among others. Let's locate this common denominator of the strategic alliance that we see today, Russia. Russia, anti-hegemonic power, before called Russian Federation. It's a Eurasian country. It limits with 14 nations, 2 oceans and 3 seas. To the north, with the polar ocean. It also has limits with Norway, Finland, Estonia, Letonia, Belarus, Ukraine, Black Sea. To the north, with the polar Arctic Sea, and to the south, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan, with a surface of 17 million square kilometers. It also has a vast coastline of 37 square kilometers. All of these information makes it the biggest country in the world. Russia has always had global influence, first in the times of the Russian Empire, and then as the biggest country of the USSR, and afterwards as a renowned power. Its capital city is Ursk. Russia has the main resources of minerals that have not been exploited, and it's considered the major energetic source. It has lots of forest and the fourth part of the sweet water, of the fresh water. Its economy has the greatest growth in the world. It's the 8th country of GDP, with the 3rd highest military budget in the world. One of the 5th countries of military weapons. It's one of the 5 members of the Security Council of the United Nations, and it's part of the G20 and the OMC. In the last years, there has been an influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. Their presence has been defined by their major participation in economic agreements, along with selling weapons, on the other hand. I'm going to take advantage to recommend that you visit the website of Russia, where there is a summary of the Prime Minister of Russia to Havana. He says, that means primary results to the visit of Cuba. And since we're in this zone, let's check websites. For example, what does Reuters say in one of their dispatches? A new capacity transforms Russia to being a crude producer in key times of the crisis. The Minister of Energy, Mr. Novak, was ready to elevate the production of crude in the world. I open quotes, if there was need, we are ready to have a coordinated action, close quotes. We spoke with the Minister of Saudi Arabia, and they said that they could handle it, so I thought there was no need to make any other measures. Before, only Saudi Arabia and their neighbors had the capacity to inject more supplies of oil in hard times. We have said that we have capacity of 300,000 barrels a day, but currently our capacity is even bigger. This is a close quote. So what he's saying is that they have a potential of 500 barrels a day. Last week, Novak organized the first summit between the Prime Minister of Cis and the Iranian petroleum delegate. Saudi Arabia blamed Iran on the attacks, which Tehran rejects. But beyond that, OPEC's commitments are held. Another agency, in this case Sputnik, with an article from 7th of this month, all of the countries of NATO have binded cars except Russia. They have more cars than Russia itself. Even after the USSR, Russia has the biggest cars in the world. In comparison,
disponen de poco más de 11,000 unidades, según los datos publicados por el portal Global Firepower.
This is according to Firepower. After increasing the number of armored cars, the total number was to 18,000. And Russia, who has the major number of armored cars, this is 3,200, is near every time to Russia. Some people say that it's too many cars and that this gives you an idea of an aggression. However, this is not so. a spokesperson from Russia says that the number of tanks has not increased recently, and they said that Russia had always had more cars than NATO altogether. Now, let me recommend the lecture of Arancho Tirado and Felix Caballero, published by CELAC.org/RUS. It's called Russia and Latin America, Threat for the U.S. At grosso modo, the conclusions say that if, the expansion of Russia and Latin America and the Caribbean has increased in the last years, this presence of policy and cooperation should not be an alert for the U.S. In fact, the Russian Federation has not established military bases in this area as opposed to the USA. In this sense, it seems that the U.S. would be more of a threat to the security of Russia than vice versa. The debate at the end is that any advance of a power that breaks the hegemony of the U.S., even more if it happens in the strategic reserve of the U.S., is a threat for the economic interest of the U.S. In a context of geopolitical transition and fight for the resources of minerals and energy between China, Russia, and the U.S. Some resources that are in Latin America and the Caribbean and whose control is pivotal to determine what is the new configuration of the future. Moscow and Beijing may be the biggest contenders of the U.S., and this is where the threat lies. Let's refresh some information. We do it with our correspondents. Let's start with Alia Fernandez from Havana. Hi. Greetings from Havana. In fact, this is a historical visit from the chief of the government of the Russian Federation to Cuba. This was held last week. The Russian leader ratified the excellent relations between Cuba and Russia in strategic areas for development of the Cuban economy, areas such as transportation, science, and technology, as well as energy that, of course, has created lots of expectations. According to the Caribbean country, there is a perception that this country may be weak. However, let's recall that at the beginning of this year, Cuban and Russian authorities have agreed a route for the modernization of the energy system of Cuba, and this has advanced. The authority of Russia himself has made a tour on the plant where there is an extraction of oil in the province of Mayave that is 40 kilometers from Havana. It's important to highlight how the point of view and the ties between these two countries are also at an excellent moment, and how there are several coincidences in the defense of a multipolar world and the rejection of the unilateral measures, especially from the U.S. on Cuba. Medvedev had a very clear position on countries like Nicaragua, Venezuela, and they reject the blockade against Havana, and he said that in the case of Venezuela, and regardless of all of these actions to dismantle the political system in this South American country, he said that in Venezuela there is only one legitimate president, and his name is Nicolás Maduro. There is also something very important to be said on how the relations of Russia with Latin America are going on, and because he says that they don't see Latin America as their backyard, this is a clear reference on how the U.S. traditionally sees the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. It's also important to highlight that this visit happens in the context where U.S. has increased the measures against Havana, and this posture of Russia is also a clear evidence that the bipolar world has been left behind, and now this new world has several standpoints, and where we can advance through dialogue and economic development. It's also important to say that the Prime Minister of Russia spoke about the importance that he gives to the stability in Latin America and the Caribbean, and he also highlights the traditional relationships that Cuba had with the socialist nations of Europe, and he also spoke about the sanctions that the U.S. has always imposed against the USSR with the purpose of having political concessions. However, he highlighted how the Russian people maintained themselves firm, and they were never subjected to these interference actions on behalf of the U.S. So we're speaking of an excellent state of the of the USSR and Cuban relationship. Thank you very much, Alien. This happened in Cuba. Let's see what happens just recently in Venezuela with the visit of a committee from Russia that had a dialogue with the President Maduro. Let's go to our correspondent of Caracas. Hello, Ray. Good afternoon. As you said, this recently happened this Friday and Saturday of the past week. In Caracas, there was a interministerially high-level committee summit where the relationships between Russia and Venezuela were strengthened. On this occasion, the delegation of Russia, led by the Vice Prime Minister, came from Russia, and the counterpart for Venezuela, they had the Minister of Industries, along with Delcy Rodriguez. They worked on Saturday morning on a cooperation agenda on specific topics such as agriculture, food, steel, and petrochemical industries. The evaluation that they both made on how this relationship has advanced is very positive. The numbers that Russia gave was that during the first 7 months of this year, 2019, the commercial exchange has increased in 10% in comparison to the same term in last year, and it is foreseen that for the rest of the year, it will reach $150 million of commerce between both countries. These industries that are very important for Venezuela in the past times, for example, medicine, there's an agreement, so there will be a large doses of medicines against the cold. This will increase all the way to 5 million. And of course, everything that can be done in terms of petroleum, of PDVSA and Rosneft from Russia, these are topics that have been in discussion. This biministerial summit was held first in Moscow, and now here in Venezuela. During the afternoon, the first vice minister met with President Maduro, and they closed with the signing of some agreements. And President Maduro, when held a press release, he said that this is a very important meeting because it contributes to overcome the difficulties imposed by the blockade of the U.S. on Venezuela. This means that with the mutual cooperation between the countries, it has been a very productive work in the short, medium, and long term. As a last detail, it's important to say that the President mentioned that they are working in a new economic architecture for Venezuela, along with other countries like Russia, Iran, China, that are also trying to generate new commercial relations that make them not dependent of the global economy. This is why they're also using digital currencies, cryptocurrencies that are tied to the price of the barrel of oil, and these details are also being worked on. This would be a new financial architecture for Venezuela. This would be a way to eliminate the crisis created by the sanctions. Thank you very much, Leonel, for this summary. Let's go to mark our first pause in our critical moves. We're also on internet, so you can participate, interact, and send your opinions. There we have our questions. Can the U.S. blockade policy advance against Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with the solid alliance that they have among them? Write to us. We want to hear from you.
La Federación Rusa, que es su nombre oficial, la Federación Rusa, y países progresistas de nuestra área. Acompáñenos.
Let's make a draft on how the relationships between Russia and the U.S. have developed in the recent history. Latin America and the Caribbean has a geostrategic location for the country that Putin directs. This has been said in a document that Russia has signed, and it states that they should strengthen the relationship with Latin America. They have relationship with many of the Latin American countries that have benefited from the second power in the weapons world globally. The strategic ally is Brazil, where in 2018 they spent $5 billion. Rosneft bought 50% of TNKBP of Brazil. In 2000, there was a Chavez and a meeting with Russia. Several times after, he met with the president for the first time. In 2008, Dmitry Medvedev went to Venezuela. In 2015, he was also in the celebration of the 70 years of the war. They have signed many agreements between the two countries, and there have been many loans from Russia to Venezuela, and they have also bought back a lot of oil. There has also been a lot of support support to the country of Nicaragua. Both nations have advanced in projects of infrastructure, particularly of renewable energy and hydroelectric. They're also in water and medicine. Nicaragua is expecting to receive tons of wheat from Russia. There has been when Putin visited Cuba in 2004, he forgave part of the loan from that they had with Russia. And there has been a conjoint project of scientific and technological aspects, and it was signed in Havana. Let's go to the analysis. We have our guest from Bolivia. We have our friend Ramiro. He's an international analyst. Ramiro, we have seen how Russia has reinforced their ties with progressive countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, but not only with these nations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, this is so. We can see that there's a very interesting international scenario. Well, the there's multipolar world now. We have seen a context of cooperation and integration. And from a national standpoint, we've seen an exercise that also fortifies and strengthens this relation. And there's been, this sequence of time shows that there is a coincidence in national objectives and transformation, both socially and economically. And if in this context we see that there is an international context where the agreements have been beneficial for both parts, what we see that of this approximation of Russia with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua has a favorable scenario. And so this makes us see with expectation how there can be transfer of technology, of industry, and to foment better development. Thank you very much, Ramiro. Let's go to Julio Olveiro. He's also an analyst on international topics. Thank you very much. This is a pleasure to speak with you and with the audience of Telesur. Thank you for being with us. Brazil, the giant of Latin America, has also have relationships with Russia. However, right now they don't have a progressive government. Brazil has maintained those ties. Yes, I think that with China and Russia coming to our continent is positive for our country. Although there are governments that don't see to the country, and there the importance of the unity of the countries, so they can develop their people and breach the threats of the U.S. has made that these countries keep their unity and cooperation. I think that if we could not increase the cooperation, history would push it towards this. And it's important not to allow the United States to grow with their domination. and so we can keep our nations independent. Thank you, Tulio. Ramiro, let me go back to you. Russia has silently confronting and stopping an imperial policy, especially against the countries of Latin America, with progressive governments. How do you see this? Well, the scenario itself of United Nations has been witness to how the international community makes attempts to put blockades on some countries. It has been well seen this has transformed these countries. And this international scenario has condemned this. So it could be conditions could be generated so there can be a conflict, resolutions of conflict. So our diplomatic job of international work must be favorable to the dialogues that are constructive, so the peace can be consolidated as well as of sovereignty of the countries. This is an exercise that is linked to the diplomatic world, but it is essential that we do it, because otherwise we will be generating violence.
Ramiro, le despido.
Ramiro, thank you very much for having us with you.
También le agradezco a Tulio Ribeiro su tiempo para Telesur.
To both our guests, we would like to thank you for your time. Let's go to our next pause. When we come back, let's keep on going further on this race that geopolitically has been done by Russia.
Pero a Rusia volvemos. Carrera que en lo geopolítico ha emprendido en los últimos años con la bandera del multilateralismo.
He's been doing it, Russia has been doing it with the multilateralism flag. And how does the U.S. see it? Let's go to a pause and we'll be right back. Geopolitically, what influence does Russia have in the world of today? Let's see this. Russia, along with China, with other powers, are trying to bring down this unilateral world that is imposed by the U.S. Vladimir Putin has stretched ties with other countries and based on solidarity. This is opposed to the policies of the U.S. They mostly confront each other on the Security Council. Just when the Libya war began, there was a no-flying zone over Libya to provide assistance for the civil population. But a couple of weeks after, there was bombardments led by NATO, following the unilateral will of the U.S. Russia and China confronted this policy of the U.S. In the conflict of Syria. Syria supported Bashar al-Assad. In 2015, this was also a military support. In the last years, Moscow and Damascus have also started actions to reconstruct the cities. This is opposed to what the U.S. normally does. Other scenario where Russia bets on is BRICS, on this mechanism of integration that brings together some emerging economies. Between 2012 and 2014, it represents 60% of the economic world's growth. This expansion is linked to the development of the countries of the Orient. Let's go to analysis with José Manuel Rodríguez López. He's an investigator, an economist. Thank you for coming to our studios, Professor. Thank you for the invitation. We have been seeing in this piece how Russia doesn't only put its focus on Latin America, but beyond. So, well, Latin America is one of the spaces where they have arrived later. Let's say that China was here first. But the most important thing is the hinge that China and Russia are making each other, each one in their field. So when we speak of Russia and China are together in this conquest for foreign countries. We must see the scenario that Russia had in 2014 when there was a blockade on Russia. They blocked their central bank. They also blocked some companies. There was a lot of damage done on Russia back then. Basically, the situation was brought forth through the crisis in Crimea. We also have to analyze Libya. We have to analyze Iraq prior, where Russia, due to the restructuring, could not be in Libya. And then, well, the United Nations had to intervene. Of course, in the Russia we see now, that is a bit more strengthened, well, we have to bear in mind that Russia still has a military base of Russia and the presence in the region. And overall, because of the conflict in Ukraine, it's at its doorsteps, and we know that the vinculation with Chechnya and Al-Qaeda and the conflict in Afghanistan and Russia. So there has been some Western interference on their borders. Are you saying directly of NATO? Yes, led by the U.S. Because the U.S. tells NATO what to do, and they even supply them with weapons. What I'm trying to say is that Russia changed its role. And another thing we have to analyze is how important to demythify the U.S. capacity and that of NATO too. Let's see, in Syria, when the Russian army came into the game, this has meant a before and after of the advance of the Islamic State. Or the mercenaries that were just paid by some countries of the region. Because the conflict of Syria has a very different optics. In fact, the government has said that there's not a single opposition. There are several interests and several oppositions. So let's see what happens. Russia has showed that they could repeal an attack. And they were not even Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein was able to solve. And there were antecedents that in the War of the Balkans, where the Russian anti-air systems limited their action to NATO. Well, the S-400 has bought them. Libya are buying them. Turkey received them just 3 months ago, and now they have their airspace protected. And let's not forget that Venezuela also has these weapons.
Parte de la OTAN se rompió cuando hicieron un golpe de Estado y querían sacar al presidente Erdogan.
And another country that surprisingly also changes its view and has bought weapons from Russia was Turkey. Turkey used to be an ally of the U.S. and now it no longer is. What we have to see is that Russia has decided that they're not going to allow some things to happen, and they've shown their capacity to repeal the aggressions from the U.S. And let's recall President Chavez, and when he bought the Russian weapons.
El armamento ruso y el sistema de radares está ahorita protegiendo nuestro espacio aéreo y no solo va a proteger.
And now this system is the one that's protecting us. These weapons are something that really bothers the U.S. And apparently the U.S. is very worried about this because every time there's an interview, the U.S. always asks Venezuelan officials, how much weapons does Venezuela have that were bought to Russia? And of course, they know what we have, and that's why they're not going to risk anything. The geopolitical situation in Latin America is clear because the situation that we see now is a matter of resisting. The conflict that we used to have in the border some months ago, where we had some so-called humanitarian help, now we have programs in Ecuador and Peru. There's a problem in Colombia that is ongoing. These are countries, for example, Colombia, that is going under the table. They have a conflict because there are some groups that went to the peace process and now just left it again. And one of the guarantees of these peace process has left because the countries that guaranteed those processes just left. Let's analyze the situation of Brazil. After some time, they have diminished their conflict against Venezuela, understanding that the historic relationship with Brazil has been important, and that the north of Brazil has been supplied by Venezuela, energetically, I'm saying. So they have to measure their words. So even this, the exchange that we had with on the military aspect with Brazil was very important because we had students from them coming to us and vice versa. So, something that we have to see, there was a silence in the news media. 3 weeks ago, there was an attack of drones with Russian missiles. We're able to bring down the refinery of Saudi Arabia. With these weapons, that we're not speaking of the S-400, we're just thinking of old-fashioned Russian weapons. And they were reinforced with non-manned aircrafts. So there are antecedents for these tactics that go back to the wars in Sinai, and with Israel and its allies in the region have used it. These are not new tactics nor new weapons. When we talk about the military budgets for the Middle East, we can't say that they haven't bought any weapons. And right now, yes, they thought they were going to end up easier, but they're ongoing 2 years already.
la situación. Ahora, si nos movemos a Latinoamérica,
If we go to Latin America, this is a moment where Russia cannot allow
estamos hablando del escenario,
that all of their allies fall.
Pero antes de entrar en esa particularidad,
But before we go to this particularity, I want to ask, who has allowed the strengthening of Russia as a world power that is respected even by the U.S.? Well, I don't think that it is like this. I think that Russia has been able to come forth. They have overcome the first 10 years of this of the dissolution, and it's been able to consolidate itself as a political power. Well, let's speak about Putin. We have to speak of Medvedev, but we also have to speak of a country that has an economic potential, a huge military force, that had aerospace development. They had a system of missiles that are anti-aircrafts. This is the major float of submarines too. The first man on space. So this came from Russia, the Russia that has a long history. This is a Russia that cannot allow that their members in Latin America fall. Because, as I told you, this is a thing of resistance. We have to resist. We have to resist so much that the fact that there has been a month that has passed, apparently there's going to be another president that's going to fall. There are elections in Argentina. The Peruvian president fell. Apparently the Ecuadorian president is going to fall too. And let's see let's see how Bolsonaro is treating Venezuela. Now, it is said that a country has the power to overthrow him. This is a country that should have been intervened, and this is a country that needed help. And the help that we need is that there is no financial blockade, and that they leave our resources in peace. That is the help we need. We need for Citgo to be given back. So what does the President Lenin want to do? He's prepared to leave and to be the president of Ecuador outside Ecuador. Why would he do that? Well, it's because he lost his space of government. I don't want to imagine if somebody abandoned Moscow or Washington. When you abandon your capital, there is something that's going on. So you think that he's giving in Quito to everybody. Well, the thing is that he's going to quit, because otherwise he's kicked out. Or otherwise they will do like a Guaidó movement and delegitimize whoever gets to power of Ecuador. This is a movement that allegedly has the hope of the right. How does the Latin American right see the solid relationship between Russia and the progressive countries in the world? There's something else. The relationship they have now is political, strategic, and it's above all historic. With Nicaragua, it's also historic. Well, the situation in Central America is terrible, because the support with troops in the special times
La gente se quejaba de la latica que venía de Rusia hasta que dejó de venir y entonces empezaron a
Well,
extrañar.
before
Cuando los
the
pedidos especiales
people
hacía
used to
falta
complain
la
about
carne.
the
Es correcto.
about
Entonces, eso hay historia. Hay historia.
Russia
La
tuna
relación con
fish
nosotros,
until
el
it no
presidente
longer
Chávez
arrived.
la
Well,
extendió
this is
cuando
to
nos
say that our
quitaron, hicieron el
relationship
embargo de armas
is very
norteamericanas,
long.
pues, rápidamente se hizo
We
una
had
reconversión importante
all the
en
way
nuestro
from
armamento,
President
y
Chávez.
que hoy ya no tenemos que pedir, o sea, no tenemos que
We
pedir,
started
ya
with
eso
this
está aquí.
relationship, and
No
now
tenemos que pedir un comando aeroespacial.
we don't even have to
Como
ask
anteojos
for
de-
an
del uso de la
aerospace command.
intervención.
We already
Yo creo
have
que
it
ahorita se
here.
están viendo el ombligo. Una de las situaciones importantes es que
I
cuando tú
think
empiezas
that
a
what
decir,
the
eso pasó en
importance of
Colombia,
this
fíjate que empezaron a
this
hablar de
visit
reivindicar de que la gente podía quemar policías, que podía romper el orden
is that
público
now
y la
the
zona
rules are
de
more
la costa
clear.
colombiana, que ha sido siempre psiquitrillada y maltratada por los gobiernos, se alzó uno principal de los
And now
puertos,
these
diciendo, bueno,
people
pero si
have
lo pueden
just
los venezolanos,
stood
¿por
up
qué no?
saying,
Y los
well, then
ecuatorianos
why
están
can't we
diciendo, si tú
stand up?
aplaudes
And
allá
Ecuador
motines
is
en
also
Caracas
standing up.
contra el Estado, porque no podemos hacer eso y le está pasando a Lenin.
And this is what's happening to Lenin Moreno. And the Ecuadorian says that the Congress can do whatever they want and kick somebody out.
De Perú. Entonces,
Well, then Peru is also doing the same thing. So when you delegitimize the structure, you have to know what door, because this becomes a coin of two sides. Thank you very much for your time. Let's go to our conclusions.
La tiene fácil Estados Unidos.
Well, United States thinks it's easy to sanction and to dominate. However, they didn't count of Russia supporting some of the countries. Is it possible that the eagle, the U.S. eagle, can maintain their hegemony on these countries? Who's the real loser in this story? We close our program for today. See you tomorrow.